Episode 45, Andes Mountains Plane Crash Survivor, Eduardo Strauch. Welcome to The Art of Excellence, a show about people doing extraordinary things in their lives. I'm your host, Glenn Zweig. Thanks for joining me. Eduardo Strauch is an architect and painter living in Montevideo, Uruguay. He is also one of 16 survivors from a 1972 plane crash in the Andes Mountains, which was chartered by an amateur Uruguayan rugby team. He survived 72 treacherous days trapped high up in the mountains. He wrote a book about his experience called Out of the Silence After the Crash. Eduardo, welcome to the show.
Yeah, happy to be with you.
I want to go back in time to 1972, October 13th, 1972, to be precise. Take me back to that day. Why was an amateur rugby team chartering a flight to begin with? What was going on?
In 1972, we rent an airplane of the Air Force, Uruguayan Air Force, to make our second trip to Chile to play with a rugby team there. We did that because we need to have a less expensive trip as possible. We were young guys and, we can't spend much money. So it was a really inexpensive trip, renting the airplane from Air Force.
But the weather didn't look really promising, did it?
The weather was not that bad.
Oh, it wasn't? Okay.
It was very clear for me. Many of us and many people outside of the plane, they talk about the bad weather. But I was leaning over a right window and watching the beautiful landscape of the Andes with a lot of snow. And I remember very clear, it was not a bad weather. It was cloudy, but not that bad at all.
So, Eduardo, I don't believe you even played rugby. So what was your association with the team? Why were you even on this flight?
Well, we went to a school, the Christian Brothers of Ireland, and one of the main subjects in the school was to play rugby. So I played rugby since I was very young. And after we left school, we organized our rugby team. The friends that we left school, we started playing in that team.
Oh, so you were on the team?
I was not playing at that time. I was one of the co-founder, but I was not playing anymore because I have no time. I was studying and working as an architect, so I have no time to practice. My goal really was to go skiing in the beautiful ski resorts just not far from Santiago de Chile.
So you take off. The weather didn't look that bad, a few clouds out there. Walk me through this flight. So what happened? Did you know what was coming?
Well, even now, 40 years later, it's not very clear what happened. It was a human error of the pilots. It's very simple because you need at least 12 minutes to cross the Andes, in that part of the Andes. And we don't know why the pilots start getting down in the middle of the Cordillera of the range with just a 6-minute flight. We don't realize even now what happened, why they don't just watch the watches and see that the time was not enough to having crossed the Andes. As I told you before, it was cloudy, but you can see the peaks. It's not clear even now what happened.
But were you looking out the window? Did it look like you were eerily close to the mountains, or everything seemed normal?
At the end, I was really frightened because the peaks were coming too close and closer and closer. And the planes start shaking and the noises of the engines, I can't forget it. Very, very clear in my mind even now. All the other passengers were just playing with a rugby ball, and they don't realize what they're going through.
Do you remember the crash itself, going through it, or was it all blurry?
Absolutely clear. I remember all the noises and the smell. The fuselage broke in two parts, and the cold air coming inside and the smell of the kerosene and the noises absolutely clear in my mind.
And it all happened over a matter of seconds, I would assume.
Yeah, seconds that it was like hours.
You were physically injured. What kind of injury did you have?
Not that much. I have just quite a profound, deep injury in my leg, and I felt a very hard pain at the beginning, but my mind immediately, I couldn't think about that, and I started just struggling to survive.
How many people were on the flight, and how many survived? At that time, how many survivors were there?
Yeah, we were 45 people with the crew. In the crash, they died 16.
Upon impact, 16 had perished.
Yes.
So, Eduardo, I'm sure there are a range of emotions. Do you recall being more elated that you had actually survived and were still breathing? Or saddened about your friends that died? Or even just frightened over what might come in the next moments, hours, days? What was going through their head?
It was very hard, as you can imagine. And it was the first contact of all of us young people, the first contact with death and that kind of pain and the suffering. But it's amazing how the human mind immediately get used to and start working to get used of that kind of situations. And it was a really inflection point in my life. In that moment, the moments after the crash, I start realizing the value of life, and even now I have a very different feeling about life, about being alive. I really try not to spend time doing nothing. I try to live my life fully and as deeply as I could.
Describe the scene. So the plane finally stops, and there you are. What did you see inside the plane and outside?
The first moment, I was just turned back in my seat. And when I started opening my eyes, feeling that I was just getting out of a nightmare, because it was impossible to be in a plane crash in the Andes. But when I opened my eyes, I saw one of the women who were one of the passengers, who she was dead on my back. So I started realizing that it was real, what I was living. Immediately, I want to get out of the fuselage. I was a little bit confused at the beginning, very, very, very cold. And I start walking out of the fuselage. My cousins get me and say, "No, Eduardo, come on, what are you doing? Coming to the fuselage is so cold." It's amazing, no? Because we were just with the shirts. It was springtime, that time in the South Hemisphere. And they believe that we had 30 centigrades below zero at that moment in those nights in the Andes. And we are just with shirts at the beginning. We have no warm clothes at the hand. And I remember all the sounds, people shouting, screaming. I remember many dead people around me. We were 4 cousins, and we start shouting the names of each one, Eduardo, Daniel. And 3 of us, we were alive, and one, Daniel Cho, he died in the crash. Immediately, we connect our minds to the need of survival. And I remember that Marcelo Perez del Castillo was my close friend. We were close friends since we were 6 years old. And Marcelo was the captain of the team. He was playing rugby and he was the captain at that time. So he turned immediately into the leader of the group, helping people. We start taking all the dead bodies outside because we were a very small place to spend that night. And of course, we realized, or we thought, that it would be just one night and the rescue would come the next day.
Yeah, so I figure you just are thinking we just have to somehow survive a number of hours before they're going to find you, right? I mean, everyone knows that the plane had crashed.
We were absolutely convinced that the rescue won't come that day because it was late, it was getting dark. But of course, the next day we will be rescued. The plane was a quite modern one and had a quite modern equipment. So we're just waiting for the rescue the next day.
So walk me through some of the elements that you had to battle once one day turned into 2 days, into three, into a week and beyond. I mean, you mentioned the temperature, I assume just continuous frigid temperatures, but less oxygen up, I assume, high where you were. And then hunger and thirst and everything else.
The toughest thing, absolutely, it was to get water, because at the beginning we realized, or we thought, it would be very easy to get water because we were surrounded by snow. But in one hand, the snow was all mixed with the kerosene of the engines. We couldn't use that snow around the plane. We suffer really thirst. When I start thinking about the first days and the first moments, I really remember that suffering of lack of water. And you need much more water in that altitude. So it was really, really a very hard suffering. And of course, the food, maybe the first 2 or 3 days, I suffer hunger. We talk about food and about receipts and about restaurants. And then we realized it was very negative, because we start producing our gastric acids and we have nothing to eat. Just some small pieces of biscuits and a very small cup of wine a day, and toothpaste when we had it. And we realized that we were getting very weak. We start getting very scared of losing our minds. It was the only we had. It was our minds. We have nothing material. We had no water, no food, no warm clothes. We didn't know where we were. We have just a piece of broken fuselage as a hut, as our home. So the only thing we had was our minds. We must create, organize, imagine, invent many things. We must organize a new society with the few elements we had. So we were aware that our minds were absolutely important. And when we start feeling weak, we start thinking about where to get food. So we start trying to eat the leather belts or the leather shoes. It was impossible, of course.
Because of the situation you're in, and you're not getting enough food, you're not getting enough liquid, the altitude, everything, you want to minimize any sort of energy exertion. And so there wasn't a lot of walking around or movement. So are you just, and I think even talking exerted energy. So are you just like literally lying there in the fuselage just 24 hours, just with your own thoughts? Like, what was the actual day to day like?
Yeah, many people ask me if we don't get bored all day doing nothing, but our minds were working absolutely every moment. Even the nights, we just spend maybe half an hour sleeping or an hour, and you get awake and start thinking again and trying to get solutions to everything. Some of us, they could walk and they were quite strong, and they tried to get from the tail and see there was some food there and some warm clothes, but I couldn't walk and I couldn't move just because of the altitude. I have lack of oxygen and I suffer that all the time. So really we spent hours and hours and hours just lying and thinking, just talking a few words and the necessary words, and our minds, my mind at least, travel around the universe. It was amazing, that kind of moments of meditation I had, spontaneous meditation. It helped me a lot just to disconnect of that situation. My mind was free as never. I felt my mind was expanding in the universe, and no thoughts coming into my mind, just the one I want to have. And my body was just like in jail, because I can't move more than 50, 100 meters around. So it was a really amazing contrast of my mind and my physical body.
So I believe it was on the 10th day that you heard the news that because you had some radio that was still functional. You heard the news that the search had been called off. You were essentially left for dead. Walk me through that moment. Like, did it feel like a death sentence?
That moment was really one of the worst moments of all the Odyssey. We had a lot of very tough and bad moments, but that one, just listening that the world, our parents, they were left, stop the searching, and we felt abandoned. It was really, really very hard. We had to make very hard efforts in our minds to don't get depressed. On the other hand, we knew that the only possibility of getting out, it was in our hands. And we won't just wait to rescue somebody from the outside to help us. So we start organizing to get out by ourselves.
As if this nightmare you're living through weren't enough, your plane was right in the glide path of a violent avalanche, which killed another 8 people. I mean, here you are barely hanging on, and now suddenly another group gone. I mean, how do you possibly recover from that?
October 29th, it has been a very stormy day. It was snowing and windy, and we heard many strange noises all day. We were stressed. We were stressed all the 72 days, night and days. But that special day was very, very scary. We were trying to sleep, and we listened to a terrible noise and trembling. It was a huge avalanche that came into the fuselage. We get all covered with snow, a very compressed snow, like a piece of ice. I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe, and I realized it was the end of my life. I was just living the last moments of my life. I have a lot of feelings and thoughts in my mind, just in a few seconds or less than 3 minutes, of course, because otherwise I will die without oxygen. But in those 3 minutes, I have so many thoughts and feelings. At the beginning, I was really scared, afraid of going into death. And I thought in my parents, oh, I'm sorry, mom, dad, I'm leaving. I struggled all what I could, and well, I couldn't do nothing now, and I'm leaving. I'm very sorry. After those negative feelings and scary feelings, I start feeling some difficult to explain, a kind of a happiness, deep happiness, spiritual happiness, physical pleasure, something absolutely fantastic. Well, I really want to go ahead and see what happened at the end. I was convinced at that moment that I was dead. It's amazing how I had that experience, and I felt I was dead. Well, I'm dead now, and in that moment, my cousin Victor moves, and the oxygen came again into my lungs, and well, I have the strength to continue struggling and fighting for being alive. And Marcelo, my friend, he died just beside me. It was too late when we tried to help him and take the snow and the ice from his face. And it was really strange too when you have so sad feelings because your friend was dead beside you, and but we couldn't cry, we couldn't lose liquid, so it was just a moment of sadness, and then kind of a switch that cut your feelings, and you concentrate again in surviving.
Well, you talk in the book how you became very codependent upon each other, not just for the physical survival, but for emotional support. So here's a quote from the book. We all occasionally fell into bouts of deep depression, but then the group would notice it and act in support of that person, like a living organism trying to rebuild its own weak cells. So talk about that part of it. How did the group come together?
It was very, very moving, no? What happened with the group. We really work like an organ. And we realized it was very, very important to have hope, not to be depressed. It was really dangerous to get depressed. And I'm sure that many of the boys who died at the end, it was because of that they couldn't have hope anymore, and they couldn't have positive thoughts anymore, and they died at last. We immediately tried to help the boys who were getting down and losing hope. And even it happened to me many times. It was very helpful to be three cousins, the same age, and we were very close cousins. So we helped each other. And when I was getting down and depressed, they helped me. No, come on, Eduardo, we have the power that we are discovering now in our minds, and we're getting out. You must keep struggling. We were all the time just fighting and struggling with negative thoughts and depression.
So once you ran out of food, I mean, the very minimal provisions you even had, it was only a matter of time until you would starve to death. People familiar with the story, I know that you ended up resorting to cannibalism to survive. You had to eat the bodies of those that had perished before you. Who came up with that idea, and how was it initially received by the group?
Before we tried to eat to get proteins from the leathers and we try everything, but it was urgent to get proteins and energy again. We were feeling very weak at the fifth and sixth day, so many of us start thinking about the only proteins we had were the proteins of the dead bodies. It was, you can imagine, a terrible thought. At the beginning, I thought, well, I'm getting crazy thinking about that. I'm getting crazy. But one day, Fito, my cousin, came from a short expedition to see if they could see the other side of the mountain. And they came back very weak, cold and very weak. And he told me, Eduardo, you know what I'm thinking about? We must have proteins, and the other proteins, the other one we had in the dead bodies. So at that moment, I felt that I was not getting crazy, and Fito was thinking the same, and many others. So we start talking about that the same day, and many of the boys, they refused the idea. They say, no, it's impossible. You're crazy. But the next day, it was a very emotional meeting. Well, we all together, just always in a meeting. But that night, we tried to convince the ones that were not convinced yet, and the argue who convinced everybody was just to offer our bodies to the group. So we didn't know who was going to die before and who was going to be the food of the others. It was really emotional moment, and I really convinced Marcelo that he was not convinced at all at that moment. And at last he said, well, okay, you are right. Maybe you will be my food or I will be your food. And that's so nice. Give life to our friends instead of just lying in the mountain. So we start doing it at the beginning, very small pieces, frozen pieces, and try to dry it over the fuselage when it was a sunny day. Maybe a week later, we were used to. It's amazing of the human beings' minds, how you can get used to that so terrible decision.
On that point, you mentioned the need to control your mind to do such inconceivable acts like eating the dead bodies. So here's a quote. It was essential to strip away the deep associations of the past from our actions and maintain that strict separation to be able to act. So, Eduardo, I'm guessing that's much easier said than done. We're talking about cultural beliefs and norms ingrained over the course of your entire life.
Yes, it was really difficult to get over the taboos of thousands of years. We could do it very fast too. I was proud of myself, of my mind. I remember in that moment how I could get over those taboos and all the norms, and start doing that to survive.
I think you said that as a means of survival, you were also able to meditate. And by doing so, detach yourself from the agony and the suffering, if only for a moment. I think this mindfulness was something new for you. Can you share what that was like? Like, how did that enable your survival? What did that do for you?
Yes, it was something new for me. It was amazing how we had so clear what it was important to do, what was important in life. We realized the importance of love in all its ways, because if we would have our beloved ones just waiting for us, I think it would be impossible to be struggling so much and suffering so much. So I really realized that the importance of love for our beloved ones, the love for nature, the love for our friends, for life.
So once the group came to the realization that rescue was not going to be in the cards, you decided as a group to send three of the strongest and healthiest of the survivors to seek help. But of course, you're surrounded by the mountains as far as the eye could see. Did you truly believe you were going to find a way out, that you would actually be successful in rescuing yourselves? Or was it more like, we're going to die here anyway, so, we might as well die trying?
That morning when they left, that we have some doubts. It was the last opportunity, and we had hope, but it was the last opportunity, and we have some doubts too. You always have the hope that we're getting out.
Well, after 72 days in near death conditions, your friends had made their way to civilization, and you were finally miraculously rescued from this mountain. But it sounds like you actually had mixed emotions. So, your words here, Eduardo. I was immensely happy at having been rescued, but at the same time, I felt that they were tearing me away from a world that, despite the horror and suffering, had pushed me to grow in some formerly unfathomable way, to reassert my principles and values, and to break with classic paradigms, all of which would be with me forever. So, here you were at death's doorstep for over 2 months, and now freedom had finally arrived. And it wasn't just pure elation for you?
Yeah, it was many feelings mixed, because it was the most huge happiness, and we got out because of our effort and our creativity and our organization and our powerful minds. But on the other hand, we left there our friends. The first moment we didn't realize we will miss that society, that place where we spent 2.5 months in most pure atmosphere, in the most pure relationships with our friends. So when we got out, we started missing that state that we spent there in the 72 days. I feel, and I always felt, that I have a connection with the mountain. I don't want to lose that. That's the reason, because I went there. I go there every year. I went 15 times to the place, to the site, to be close again to my friends. I couldn't cry in that time. To be close to that mountain that gave me so great moments of freedom in my mind, and I really need to go again and again.
So, how does one go back to normal? I mean, you're back in civilization after having survived something that no one could possibly understand. Did you have PTSD? Were you depressed? Did you have nightmares? Like, how hard was it just to go on living after that kind of ordeal?
Very difficult for people to understand what we passed and what we were feeling after the rescue. Even my mother, my father, my closer friends, they couldn't understand what we lived. So I felt at the beginning alone, and I have some moments of depression, but I knew about the power of my mind, so I fight about those moments of depression, and I realized I was alive. I realized the importance of life, and I love life much more than before. And it's really unbelievable, because I never have a nightmare, never in the mountain, never before, never after me. I haven't never have had a conscious problem because of what we did to survive. I never need help of psychologists, just trying to live with all what I learned in the mountain. That helps me a lot.
In what ways does it help you?
Well, I knew perfectly clear after the experience, which is the way I must go to be happy. It's just that simple. I enjoy much more life. I always enjoy life before, but I enjoy it much more now. I had and I have problems like everybody, but I really enjoy every moment of life. And I'm not scared about death. I'm just scared to don't have time to do many things I would like to do, even now in my life.
So, looking back, have you ever wondered why you survived when so many others perished?
No, it's a question that many of us made to themselves. I never thought about that. I just look forward and try to do all my best and to take advantage of all what I live, to live better and to live more happy. But I never think about that. Why me and why not my friend or my cousin? No, because I know that I wouldn't have the answer. So I don't make myself the question.
Several of the survivors came out and told their stories pretty quickly, but you stayed silent. And not just for a year or two, but for years and years, I think even decades. Why?
Well, I need that time to order all my thoughts. And at the beginning, I don't want to talk and to go to the medias because I knew that I will make suffer all the families of the boys who died. So I preferred not to make them suffer more than they were suffering. And in one moment, I started feeling the need of transmitting all my experience. And it happened something very incredible and amazing because an alpinist, he found 33 years later my jacket in the mountain that I've lost in the crash up near 5,000 meters high 33 years later. And well, when he made contact with me and told me what happened and at last sent me my jacket, it was another inflection point, and I felt that I must transmit my experience. I felt connected again with the story, with the moment, with the place, and because of that jacket, I started giving lectures around the world, and then I start feeling the need of writing.
Is the telling of the story, the writing of the book, the speaking, is the purpose because it's cathartic for you, or do you feel that it's an important story to tell for others to learn from it?
I think that I share in lectures and I wrote my book for two reasons. One, because I think it is very important for people, because I felt that when we start sharing the story, people thanks us to share the story and they take from our story, they take many important lessons for their lives. Many people they decided to commit suicide. They change ideas when they find our story. Or I really know it's very important for many people to connect with our story to resolve problems in their lives. And the other reason it's I told you that I didn't need any help of psychologists or doctors or whatever, but I realized that having my lectures and writing my book is a kind of a therapy. Even now, just talking with you, I realize that I'm still doing my auto therapy.
You mentioned about how this experience altered your view of the true meaning of friendship. How up in the mountain you were all stripped of what usually obscures the true essence of a person. So, in the absence of social constructs, you were able to form deep bonds with just about everyone. Talk about that.
Some of the guys who were on the plane were friends of mine, and others they were not because they were younger and I didn't know them before. And in that situation, we really took out our mask that we use in civilization. And we always say that we know each other much more than our wives or our girlfriends or our relatives because we were really naked, just a naked spirit. We take out all our masks and our the characters we play in the normal life. We have a really strong bond. We celebrate each year the day of the rescue, December 22nd, for the last 47 years. We have been celebrating that day. We have a very special relationship, more than brothers and more than friends, and something different.
So, with all the positive repercussions in your life that came out the other end of this tragedy, is there a part of you, even a very small part, that maybe feels fortunate in some way that you had this experience? And of course, I don't mean, was it worth the sacrifice of your friends' lives? But almost, given that it happened, do you feel like you're a better person because of it? Like it was meant to happen to you for a reason somehow?
Yes, absolutely. I feel that. And as you say, of course, taking away all the suffering of my friends who died, and so many people that are still suffering because of the loss, and even myself, the loss of my cousin, my friends. But I really thanks life that I could pass through that experience, because my life, I'm sure it's much more rich than it would be without living that experience, that extreme experience where I learned so many things about myself, about the universe, about people, about love, about everything.
Eduardo, the name of this podcast is The Art of Excellence. I intentionally don't define the word excellence because it means different things to different people. What does it mean to you?
I would say that the excellence is to be in peace with oneself, be in peace and sure that you are living the life you must live.
I think that's the best answer that I've ever heard. The book, again, is called Out of the Silence After the Crash. I can't recommend it enough. It was a very moving, emotionally moving story. And I think because of your reawakening, if you will, and telling your story, I think beyond it being cathartic, therapeutic for you, I know it has a lot of meaning for other people on the other end of the story. It certainly did for me. Eduardo, thank you so much for sharing your story with me and my audience. I really enjoyed this.
It's been a pleasure talking with you. I like to talk about my story with smart people like you, and I'm very glad to have had that talk.
Hey, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. You can subscribe to the show at iTunes, Stitcher, and theartofexcellence.com. I've got one small favor to ask. If you like the show, please take a minute and leave us a review on iTunes. I would really appreciate that. I'll see you next time.